feedback. We're going to share out the feedback. Before we begin, I'd like for you to look in your packet and pull out the sheet that looks like this, because during this whole group, we want you to provide us with some additional feedback. We went around and everyone had an opportunity to give feedback regarding the goals, and we're going to ask for some additional feedback that may not be captured in the share out session that we have. So as we go along, we'd like for you to fill this out. It says whole group, African American session plan and data format. So we want you to give us feedback on the goals again. If you still have questions, if you still want to make some suggestions, we're going to do the same thing. You'll fill this out also for the data portion that Dr. McMahon will be conducting this afternoon. So this is the time for you to give additional feedback, and we're going to ask you to leave this here. You do not put your name on it. And now we're going to ask for the district goal facilitators to share out. The reporter is going to share out recommended feedback that was scribed during each group. And then we're going to ask the recorder for each of those groups to chart additional feedback as well, so everybody can see additional feedback as we go along. So we're going to ask the recorder for Goal 1 as well as the reporter for Goal 1 to come up. And there's an additional chart paper here if you need to add additional information based on the feedback that we get from either the ones that are on social media or the ones that are participating virtually or from here. Wherever you want to put it. This is up to you.
Am I on? It says it's on. Oh, I'm just going to turn around.
So if you need additional chart paper for you to record for Goal 1, the additional feedback, you have that available.
All right. We had a rather lengthy, where is my sheet? Is that me right there? Come on. There, that's Dr. Lord's. Where's mine? Did you grab mine?
Yeah.
All right. Had a rather lengthy goal, but it allowed us to touch on a lot of different things with the group. So really appreciate the feedback that we got from each group as we went around. Dr. Lord's putting up our comments there. And as I shared with each group, I'll go rather quickly just to make sure that we get out of here on time, because I think that we could, in Goal 1, probably spend 2 hours just talking about each one of these. I mean, you could probably spend 5-10 minutes talking about each of the 40 indicators. So I do apologize. I'm not trying to not give them each their due diligence, but there's a lot to cover. So 1.1, the group initially had not made any recommendations to change that, but after speaking with our fourth group, there were some recommendations about the evidence of completion. So not just providing PD rosters, but providing the scope of the training and the measurable impact of the training, which I think is good stuff. And so what we shared with that group was that's really stuff that we want to see the evolution of our professional development become. That's part of the new role that Dr. Lord will be facilitating across the district as the Director of Educator Quality, that we do look systemically at our professional development, that it is aligned to an outcome, and that outcome is measured. So really appreciate that feedback from the group as far as a possible amendment to the evidence of completion. For 1.2, initially that was recommended to be deleted, but as we looked at it was reflected on the needs assessment that was done today, or the root cause analysis that was shared, we want to bring that one back and revise 1.2 and continue to do another root cause analysis, maybe more at a school-based level, at different developmental levels. We teased out some things that were maybe unique to elementary, or maybe unique to secondary, or maybe unique to teachers. So digging deeper into this root cause analysis and collecting some specific data around it. So good feedback there. We're going to revise that one and bring that one back instead of just deleting from there. As I shared with the group, I think the language that we've proposed for revisions of 1.3 could remain the same. We recognize that there's a lot of work to do around our African American history curriculum, and we will continue to do that. But I think the language there speaks to the fact that we're going to continue to do that. 1.4, initially there were no proposed modifications, but our third group, we're going to work together there, Dr. Long, because you were the one that wanted to tease out some different language there, which I think is perfectly acceptable, and Ms. Walker's as well. I was able to articulate, I think, verbally what we meant by that one, but to make sure that the community understands what we're trying to accomplish there, I think we could probably reword it to be a little more concise. But the outcome measures there and the intentionality behind it, I don't think that we had any problem with. It's just making sure that the way that it's written is what we're really trying to get out to the community. No, correct me if I'm missing any of these, Dr. Lord. I don't have any of my notes that there was any changes to the 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, except for 1.8 needed to change the responsible staff for 1.8 due to some reorganization. I don't remember any feedback from the group there. And 1.10, it currently reads, initially we weren't recommending any revisions there, but after speaking with the first group, and we shared this with the other groups as we went around, so you've all heard this, but give you a chance to reflect on that if anybody has any changes. It currently says create a transportation plan where all students have equitable access to schools within their home zone. We were sort of thinking to ourselves, that's kind of something that should be happening anyway, right? I mean, you should have equitable transportation in your home zone. What we're really trying to make sure is that we have equitable access to schools of choice. So we'll bring that revision that there's a plan to make sure there's equitable access to schools of choice. We don't want transportation to be a barrier for our choice programs. A lot of discussion last week about 1.11. No need to change that language right now. We still need to continue to develop those processes to support equitable participation in extracurricular activities. We feel that 1.12 can be deleted as it is fully complete. There was no feedback to the contrary there. Also, no feedback to the contrary of keeping 1.13 the way that it is. No change and no feedback to changing 1.14. As you can see, it formerly said ensure the teachers have access to real-time data. That has been completed. Dr. McMahon worked hard to create those data dashboards. The next step in that process is to make sure that they are provided support in the use of those. So just modifying that to make sure that it reflects where we need to go next. A similar action step for 1.15, through all the groups, we were all in consensus there. We established the African American Student Council in the past couple of weeks, and we need to make sure that it is used meaningfully and impactfully in the next school year. So just changing the language there to have the appropriate deliverables as we move forward. Had some good discussions. I mean, now we're going to move into a period that talks about, data analysis, data review, for multiple different things. I think that moving forward, as we get better at looking at all this data together, that we may want to revisit some of these and reword them in a way that's more concise and gets at what we're doing. But for the time being, I think it's appropriate to leave it the way that it is, with the intentionality behind each one of these individual indicators. But I think that moving forward, there will be that opportunity to look at some of these. And once again, not saying that any of these different pieces of data are more or less meaningful than others. It's just when you look between like 1.16 all the way, you get into the graduation ones that are there. There's just a lot of overlap in some of what can be done if we had a systemic data review system, which we are developing. But for the time being, for these particular action steps, we do want to leave them more or less as they are. The fourth group, as we got there, we started looking at 1.19 as far as, once again, the evidence of completion. Instead of just having the course recovery rosters, and I guess I should go back, the group 4 on 1.4 had the same thing. It's not so much that we just look at the rosters, it's that we look at the students that failed a course and whether or not those students are now enrolled into credit recovery, right? So if we had 80 students that failed English 1, we should see 80 students enrolled in course recovery. So it's not so much that we just look at the rosters, because we go back to the roster is meaningless if you don't know how many kids should be on the roster. So thinking about how we can share that data as an evidence of completion. Same thing with the students who need those intensive interventions, comparing the number of students who should be getting it to the students who are receiving it. And so not that the action step needs to be modified, but the evidence of completion, there were recommendations for that. So I appreciate those support. So you see recommendations to eliminate 1.20. Once again, there's duplicative language, like as we are monitoring this and creating some of these other structures, we did monitor that, and we will continue to do that through some of the other structures and some of the other indicators. Same thing for 1.22, the district supporting principals develop and implement plans to increase graduation rates. That has certainly been accomplished. We are going through that data review with them, and it is covered in other areas as well. Help me out here, Dr. Lord. We move into 1.25 and 1.26. You see some revised language there in 1.26 for 2021, but a great recommendation. I think it was the first group that brought this up to us, was that we wanted to make sure that the parents are involved in these meetings. I mean, we've got two separate indicators there about the guidance counselors meeting and coordinating with at-risk African-American students, but why not involve the parents in the beginning? Right, let's be transparent about this. We talked about the technology. We've got individuals joining us here remotely. Some of the barriers that we used to think to ourselves of parent participation, I think we've learned through COVID that we can increase that parent participation in these meetings, and we might as well involve them as much as possible. So really enjoyed that recommendation from the group to improve that indicator.
And with that, the 1.25 and 1.26 can actually be combined. And we
Correct.
talked about that there are some overlaps within the plan, and each one of the indicators, there's a reason behind it, but if we can combine some of them, we feel like it will be a stronger plan too.
Like I said, a lot of these ones, numerous ones about graduation rates, how we monitor that, how we track that. So there were recommendations just to consolidate those and eliminate some for redundancy purposes, and the feedback from the group was positive. And each time that we went around there, we didn't feel like we were losing out and we were dropping the ball on anything. So 1.27 would be removed and 1.28 would be modified to the language you see there. 1.29 through 1.32, we did not recommend any changes, and then I do not have any notes as to any additional recommendations from any of the four groups about modifications to those. These are all things that have not been completed for various reasons, right, with COVID and other things, but we do hold them to be valuable, and we want to make sure that they are completed, and so we are recommending to keep those in place, all those 1.29 through 1.32. 1.33, initially, you can see here it was recommended for deletion because as it formerly read, it was to create procedures to ensure equitable access for African-American students to on-site college readiness testing in every high school. That was done, and so initially the thought process was let's delete it, but we know we need to implement it, and we know we need to monitor it. So just because we created the plan, we haven't enacted that plan for a full year to make sure this occurs. Some of the feedback from the group was let's change that one from a deletion to a revision and implement the created procedures and monitor to make sure that that does occur, which I think is a good thing. We want to be able to demonstrate that actually occurs. So we did demonstrate, we did fully complete 1.34, and so we're taking that off. But once again, you go back to some of the things that Dr. Lord is doing. We certainly will not drop the ball on that moving forward, and whenever necessary, we'll make sure we're providing that training. 1.35, the one revision to that one, as we talked about in last week in the equity meeting, and there was another indicator earlier. It's kind of interesting. These two are a little bit separated from, I think it was 1.11, was it 11, about the extracurricular activities to this one, just making the suggestion that that one is revised so that when we have the events that provide African-American parents, guardians, and students with information about advanced coursework and other academic things, that we also add in information about the extracurriculars, right? That's the time to reach out to them and to tell them other things that are going on. And so since we have the parents there and sort of a community engagement, let's continue to let them know about everything that is going on. So I like that addition there as well. On 1.36, you'll see similar revisions to some of the other ones as far as the verbiage in the last year's plan, which was, creating procedures or developing procedures, where now we are going to monitor the use of those procedures. So simple change in that language to make sure that what we have, the work we've done actually occurs.
And if I can add to the 1.36 in our last group, we had a discussion about the categories, and it was a good discussion, that we wanted to make sure that categories are not just added to say that kids walked across the stage, that it was authentic recognition of all students. And so we would report that back in categories so that we could actually see what type of recognitions were given to students. We may even want to develop something consistent across the district. We want schools to have ownership of that and to have their own flavor to the recognitions, but I think that we could provide some overall categories that would make it more meaningful.
Yeah, thank you. And then the last ones were not, there were not initial recommendations for revisions, and some of them are even fully complete, like 1.37. But, I look at 1.37, I've been working hard on that with Ms. Basura, talking with each of the high school principals, middle school principals, to make sure that there are policies and procedures, but I just feel like that's something we're gonna have to continue to look at, right? So I don't think that just because we did it once, that for that one, it's gonna solve that problem. We're gonna need to continue to look at that, so I'm happy to keep that where it is. And then there were some good recommendations from the groups on this one as well. And Dr. Lord, you can fill me in, because I did have to leave for these last couple of indicators with the last group.
So if you look at...
1.14, let me do that one, and then
Okay.
I'll turn it over to you.
Okay.
On 1.43 and 1.44, good feedback around how we are having evidence of completion. Then on 1.44, it just says meeting agenda, but we would also want to share similarly the data that's going on there as far as the number of students that are regressing by school and grade level, and not just, have the meeting agenda. And there was another one there for the meeting agenda on 1.38 that we would, and 1.37, that it's the documented procedures is part A, but then on 1.38, it's not just the meeting agenda where we're approving those master schedules. It's doing a check. We'll have them report on how many students were enrolled last year compared to this year. So that's data that we can share as far as evidence of completion and impact instead of just an agenda. So good stuff there as far as the evidence. I like those recommendations.
So if you could look at page 35, actually all of those items have to do with advanced courses for African American students. When we started with 1.37, the question came up in our last group about, well, they get into the classes, but what about the success rate? I want to know, how successful are they? An excellent question. We do provide a few supports on this page, but I think that's an area that we can work on and strengthen. And we can kind of dovetail some of these together, but I think really having some very specific strategies to ensure students are successful in advanced courses. I think a stronger language with that. We do mention differentiation in there. That's one part of it, but I think the being culturally responsive as well, using different strategies, I think that needs to be added. So I think there is a little bit of work to do on this page, but I think overall, it's a good starting point. So I appreciate that feedback from that last group. In each group, I think, and every group had a little different way of working. And our second group, I think, the good conversation. And I enjoyed that, just being able to sit and talk about where we are and what our view is and where we're trying to move. And so that was great. This has been a good process. The last thing I want to mention is that there were 3 items that were brought up at the very end. One is about the achievement gap. It's good that we're looking at the ranking because that looks at overall. One of the things we're concerned about is that some of our achievement for other students may be dropping, so the gap is narrowing, but that's not where we want to go. It's all students need to be increasing achievement, so that's something that we've got to watch. Looking again at the 5-year data, I know that's been mentioned, and also that the school plans at this time do not have data attached to them, the ones that are online for each school. So schools have their individual African American achievement plans, so looking at how will we attach data so we can look at that.
And I would share, we had a little discussion this morning about the rankings, but one of the other rankings that we want is to be top 10 overall. So as you increase that top 10 overall, you have to increase all students, and then by also decreasing the gap, it happens at the same time, right? Because you don't want to decrease your gap by having one group of students do worse. That's not the strategy to use. You want all students to go up, and the students that need to catch up even faster. So that's how we would accelerate both of those. But all those conversations need to be articulated so that people aren't misunderstanding what the intentionality is. So I like it. It's good stuff. And I echo Dr. Lord's statements. It was great to talk with everybody. It was a fantastic day. So thank you. And Pam, do we entertain questions now, or are we? Okay. Or maybe from the other groups that weren't on my group. And I do apologize to other directors and senior staff that, was covering some of your indicators since they're in goal one. So, Mr. Taylor, if I misrepresent you, Dr. McMahon, in any way, shape, or form, apologize. I'm just trying to cover those. And so, Dr. Jacobs, correct me if I was misspoke in any way, shape, or form of any of your indicators. Yes.
Over the break, when we talked about students in advanced classes, I think we need to add something in here that addressing providing supports for them while they're in those classes, be it tutors or other students or teachers, but some type of support or resource that will help them so that they don't fall behind.
Right.
And they feel like they have some help, because a couple of students that I know are in advanced classes, and they've expressed to me that they feel that that's what they need. They need support. And, if you've got 3 African American students in a class, and they're not friends with other students in that class, because a lot of students are friends and they help each other.
Sure.
But if I'm the only African American student in the class, I'm going to be a little bit reluctant if someone is not a friend of mine to ask them to help me or to support me. So I think, even if we could put that in, and even if it's a teacher, or, if there's a list of tutors, because their parents probably would be able to, help, defer the cost if they needed an
No,
additional
I think that's a great, strategy that we didn't have in there.
Yeah.
Initially, I think the whole conversation was around access to those courses, but once we increase access, we need to make sure they're successful.
Right.
And to your point, the students are already there. We need to make sure they're successful as well. So that was just a piece there that we may have overlooked in the first part, which is a good problem to have, right? Once we need to increase the access so the students are there, but now let's make sure that they're successful in those advanced courses. So I like that addition. I think that's a worthwhile piece. Dr. Jacobs? Did it take a second? This one over here took a hot minute to. This one's.
So I know that already and I think it was our section, it's all kind of blending together, that peer mentors are being established, and I wonder about strategically tying into those. Also, I know Vero Beach High School already has a tutoring program that is essentially run by students there, and maybe strategically identifying African American students that can be a part of that, so other African American students feel maybe more comfortable engaging with that and finding out what other secondary schools. So there might already be some structures in place where if we strategically recruited students to help those provide support to the students that are in those advanced courses, that would be a way of tying into things that we already have going on.
Yeah, it's a great conversation, because I'm just spurring, like we talk a lot about achievement gaps, and coming from Tallahassee, that you can go online, there's a lot of different gaps analysis that they already do, but I can't think of one where they do an analysis between white and black for career, technical, education, or acceleration. That's about participation. I've only ever seen that broken down between the white and black component. So to make sure our students are being successful. So I really like that. I think that's innovative to make sure that we're doing that. Usually it's just ELA performance, right, or something like that, or graduation rate. Has anybody seen that? Do we have that? Do we do that? I just haven't seen it. I just haven't seen where they break down that on a white and black gap, but it's important to do for sure. from the bridge, as they call it in some places, so the distance folks, Dr. Warrior, Ms. Wall, and Ms. Barrenborn. Fantastic, thank you.
Now, those two people who are in goal 2 come up.
Yeah, it takes a minute to unmute.
Oh,
No, I'm catching it's very hard to understand because I think the microphone's too far away, but I'm catching the gist. And I look forward to the information later on. Thank you. I just wanted to hang in there and listen.
I just realized the microphone, or the camera's behind me, so it's difficult. I could have put it in the middle there, like you guys have seen my back the whole time back there.
All right, so we had the goal area 2, and I'll first go over, there was just kind of a high-level suggestion related to professional development. And that suggestion was related to identifying very specific objectives and the anticipated outcomes related to our professional development to ensure that it's very clear from the beginning of what we expected to what outcomes we expected related to those professional development sessions. Related to that, on 2.1, right now evidence of completion shows PD rosters and PD materials used. But part of the discussion, and it came up a couple of different times with different groups, was we can show evidence of we did the PD, here are the PD materials, but did it really translate into meaningful changes in the classroom? And so how are we going about measuring that as a district? So part of our discussion was with the impact reviews that we were doing, we had incorporated the equitable classroom practices checklist on the back side of those impact review forms, and possibly using that as our measure of the impact of all of this professional development that's integrated within the plan. Also, additional discussion was that our equitable classroom practices, our restorative practices, as well as our SEL practices, many of them overlap. So you will see them fall into those different areas. So possibly adapting that checklist so that it allows us to gauge our outcomes if we're actually seeing differences based upon the professional development and technical support and guidance that we're providing in the classroom. The next request was just related to 2.3 and 2.4 ALTOS, and it was requested that the Equity Committee have more information related to the ALTOS program, so I thought that was important to just share. Also, on 2.3, we had discussions about the implementation, or the data tracking. And so right now we had indicated there that we would monitor the number of students referred to ALTOS. But what we then talked about was we need to add recidivism rates and the number of days in there. Part of the concern is, if we are having students, referring them to ALTOS, but they're missing significant amounts of instructional days, then they're not having the access to that core instruction and support. So we want to monitor that to ensure that we're using ALTOS appropriately. Also, we want to see what is the actual effectiveness of the program. The whole intent of the program is to reduce recidivism, get kids back into the classroom. And so that measure was requested to be added there. Also on 2.4, there was just a language change in there. Part of the conversation was that currently it reads research ways to expand the ALTOS program to multiple sites. That discussion kind of revolved around, are we wanting to expand it so that we have lots and lots of kids in ALTOS? No, we're hoping to actually expand the alternatives to suspension that we have. And so the recommended language change on there was to research additional out-of-school suspension options in that area. Let's see. 2.6 We just need some clarification, so we're going to need to go back to staff that's overseeing this particular area. On the evidence of completion, it indicates documentation of disciplined school-based work groups to develop individual plans. We just need clarity on whether we're referring to individual student plans or school-based plans related to discipline. And so that is an area that we will just need to clarify. Also, a possible action step was recommended to be added about establishing a common language related to culturally responsive practices and equity. So I know that whenever we are providing professional development in areas and big systems change, like multi-tiered system of supports, it's important that we have a common language. So when we're communicating, everybody is on the same page and we have consistency. So we talked about something like a communication calibration kind of professional development, where everybody is understanding how we're talking about equity, restorative practices, social emotional learning. So that was a recommendation. Then to 2.8, and Sharon, if I'm missing anything, please jump in. Okay. On 2.8, it was pointed out that there is this added language related to school-related arrest of African American students. So right now, 2.8's evidence of completion says results of needs analysis. There was conversation about having data on overall arrest, and then breaking that down into school-initiated arrest and then law enforcement-initiated arrest, so that we can get a better picture of what is actually occurring with regard to arrest. And we are jumping all the way down to page 45, where there was the additions. So these are added action steps in the new proposed plan. So the second one down, the second new one that's added, it says to provide professional development related to problem-solving team members. Right now, it did not have school counselors included in there, and they are going to be an incredibly important part of our preventative efforts, as well as problem-solving. So it was recommended to add school counselors. And then finally, there was just a language change on the very last action step. The end of that sentence says resources to aid with student and staff reentry. It was unclear of what we meant by reentry, and it's just reentry back to school. So we'll be adding that to clarify that language. Any questions? Yes, Martina. Absolutely.
So interesting when you speak about adapting a common language for cultural responsiveness and equitable classroom practices. When you were talking about the checklist, we were talking about that very thing in an effort to provide accountability for the tiered supports through MTSS prior to Tier 3, prior to referral. So I love the idea of maybe if in our action steps we could utilize some of those checklist practices or bullets in order to have a look from our perspective in order to ensure fidelity of practices prior to referring.
Yeah, very good. Any other questions, comments, feedback, anything we missed? All right. Sorry, you were looking at the back of me too. I'm so accustomed to looking at the front of the room. All right, thank you guys.
This is Terry. I actually have a comment.
Yes, Ms. Berenborg?
Yeah, I've had a concern, and I voiced this with the superintendent about the number of arrests that we do. And I really want that to be looked at very carefully this year.
All right, we've got that
Especially
noted.
with everything that's going on.
Okay. We have that noted, and we did have a good discussion with Dr. Warrior and Ms. Wall about the school arrest and how school resource officers are used versus ensuring that we're using our student services staff to do the de-escalation of students, because really those are the people that are trained in those de-escalation techniques. So we certainly will be taking a deep look at that.
And just to add,
That was my concern, and along with our SROs being trained in any of that.
so just to follow up a level of clarity, Mr. Bass, myself, Sheriff, and his leadership team did meet last week or maybe even the week before that, really to design a day of development regarding structures and systems within our schools, taking on an approach that is absolutely ensures arrest is the absolute last resort, and defining how we are serving in local parentes with in terms of serving as parents in the school day, guiding and developing our children, and not using resource officers to do anything that a school counselor or a administrator should be doing. Very receptive, productive conversation. So we're looking forward to scheduling that day of development, which would be led by me as well as the sheriff and his team regarding defining who is doing what within schools, and arrest is absolutely the last option, and we will not victimize a child for the rest of their lives for a ridiculous arrest that impedes their future. Absolutely, we have to protect that.
You've got a lot of
Thank
amen
you. I'm glad to
up
hear
here.
that. Glad to hear that. Amen.
Okay, so I don't know how the guy with the worst handwriting in the room was picked as recorder, but it is what it is. We'll have to. So I'll be honest with you, we didn't have a lot of feedback, but we did have great discussions during these group meetings. So just a couple of the takeaways was to develop a look for principals as they do walkthroughs for classes. So as we give this PD, there's a lot of PD in Goal 3, but give them some type of tool or a crosswalk to use as they go through the classrooms. And the next is how are we doing when we teach Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 in the classroom? So what are we doing for PD for practice, and also what are we doing to coach teachers up in order to use those tiers? So do you want to add anything?
I think that's really the idea, is that once you're looking at ESE, it's how you got there that's the concern for us. So in those action steps, we need to establish accountability every step of the way in order to ensure that the student who has an eligibility determination is there because that's what they actually need, that they didn't need something on the front end that we didn't give them. So those were the excellent conversations that we had.
Is there any questions or feedback? Dr. Warrior, Ms. Wall, Ms. Berenborg? No? All right. Thank you.
Very pleased. This was the first one. I mean, Goal 3, that wasn't that much feedback, so good job to Goal 3. Our last goal for the evening is Goal 4, which is HR. Is there any way you guys can come up here, just so because the camera and everything? Maybe on that side over there.
All right, good evening. Mike Smeltzer, Human Resources. First of all, thank you all for your time and your participation. Like everyone else said, there was a lot of good conversation and dialogue. With Goal 4, there really wasn't a lot of deletions, a lot of updating language. So I can go through those. So 4.1 is talking about the implementation and monitoring of a recruitment plan. So originally we had create, we're just updating that language. We created it, now we're going to implement. And one of the additions that we need to make, excuse me, and Dr. McMahon put this up there, the backup data on the website, there needs to be ease of access for that, organized better all around. So 4.2 is again combining language. .3, there's no change. That's collaborating with the teachers union. 4.4, 4.5, again, is just updating language. 4.6, so now we're going to collaborate with IRSC to identify high school students as potential educators. 4.8, again, is combining. 4.7, language updating. 4.9 is again updated language. 4.10, we created the plan, and now we're going to implement that plan and invite candidates to our district. 4.11, no change. 4.12, on this, the evidence of completion. This is implementing the culturally competent interviewing. Instead of just having PD rosters and showing that people attended, they want to show the strategies used and how that was monitored. Were they viewed? Are they actually doing it? 4.13, again, is just updating language from creating to monitoring. 4.14 is updated language, and we kind of split that up with that. So this is enrolling teachers in years 1 through 3 into the mentoring program. So now 4.14 is just inviting all new teachers to the new teacher orientation. And then 4.15, 4.16, and part of 4.14 are combined into 4.16. So that's enrolling and assigning a mentor for each African American teacher in years 1 through 3. They'll have an individual plan tailored for them according to their individual needs, and increase the number of African American mentors and publicize the program on the website, and also share the promotional materials at recruiting events. 4.18, 4.19, no change. 4.20 is, again, just a little bit of language change. It's instead of collecting, now we're collecting and submitting. 4.22, no change. 4.23, again, this was develop a plan, and now we're monitoring staff who attend equity committee meetings. 4.24 through 4.26, there's no change. 4.27 is again a revision of language. Instead of reviewing the performance plan, now we're going to monitor the use and make sure any of those educators that are being terminated for cause, that there's appropriate steps and actions taken prior to that. 4.28, no change. 4.29, no change. 4.30, no change. And lastly, this is added language. It's collaborate with Indian River State College to connect African American students with scholarships tied to careers in education. The evidence of completion there just says scholarship plan. One of the suggestions was to change that to scholarship plan in collaboration with IRSC, because it wasn't really specific about how we were going to do that. Did I miss anything? 4.22, at the end we want to add for recruiting African American teachers. And that's established partnerships with community organizations, fraternities, sororities, alumni groups, and Indian River State College for recruiting African American teachers. One of the recommendations from a group was some of the districts and colleges now, when they go out for recruiting, they have videos of their current teachers. You know, so we kind of labeled it "Why Indian River County." We weren't sure exactly where to put that into the plan, but that's one of the additions there. And another one, we talk about identifying students to become teachers, also identifying support staff to become teachers. So we have a lot of great support staff employees. What can we? Yes. Yes.
I would want to see more than just the email correspondence and profiles. It's more, because you mentioned establishing relationships.
Yes.
So are we going to build some kind of a partnership agreement or some way to funnel some teachers into our district? So what are we going to do to make that happen? So I would just like to see more evidence in that one.
Okay.
Can I add to that one?
Yes.
Our,
No.
our Director of Recruitment and Retention on her first day over there, I am sure that she has got some ideas.
Yes,
And we're
I'm
working
sure
with the
she will.
existing HR staff, so
Absolutely.
we will do that, but we want to at least let her find where her office is first.
Right. And get a phone and a computer, right? No, and I agree. And I just wanted to add that. But in working with the Indian River State College, we will connect and we will make sure that our departments are working together. But I'm excited about the Teacher Academy. We've already got it up and going, ready to go for second semester for the school year.
And one of the comments I had was we have an unlimited resource of adjunct professors. So that should be something we can easily implement.
So Dr. Moore would like me to share with you what a Teacher Academy is. And I honestly had to go and research it because I was not familiar with it. But when I talked with Indian River State College, they were excited. So as part of our partnership with them, they're going to hook us up and start a Teacher Academy for those that are interested in going into education. So this first semester, part of recruitment, we're going to, this is what you want to do, go into education. And we want to even start talking to middle school students about this as well and start getting them excited. But those students can start taking dual enrollment classes with Indian River State College. They get their first 30 credits through us. When they hit 30, then Indian River State College picks up the tab. They go and get their AA free. Then they have so many scholarships sitting there waiting for somebody to pick them up, they will get a free ride to become a teacher. And that's why we added in this African American Achievement Plan that we would, if possible, offer them a contract. I'd like to give them binders starting off in college. Say, hey, you complete this program, you've got a job. We have to do it. This is the only way. If we don't grow our own, we're not going to have the people that we need in the classrooms. There you go. That's the plan.
Yes.
Keep those who have grown here and know the value of living here. May not be a strategy that pays off for another 2 years. But imagine walking across that stage, receiving that diploma and saying, I have a job in 2 years. All I need to do is graduate. And that is exciting.
Right, and that's, oh, yes, ma'am.
Say something, just a comment, and maybe a suggestion when you meet with them, why become a teacher? If you could utilize some of the African-American teachers that we currently have on staff, because there was a time when we knew all of them, but we don't know who they are now, and I'm sure the students don't either, especially if they've never, had a class with that teacher. So, if you could get a group of those, I think the impact it will have coming from an actual African-American teacher will be tremendous, okay? Okay. Yes, she would love that, okay?
Yeah, and to Dr. Moore's point, I didn't know about any of this, and I think one of the greatest changes in language that we had was talking about identifying the African American students. And at the very end, it says, attempt to contact these students for recruitment purposes. And the change language says, if they graduate from college with appropriate credentials, and if possible, meaning basically we have a position, we will offer them a contract. So.
This is Terry Barenborg. May I make a comment?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, two things. What you're describing is what St. Lucy's been doing for a few years, and it's been very successful for them. It's called Promise is a Promise. Any student that goes to any teaching college, not just IRSC, but if they go to, when they stay in high school, that they intend to be a teacher, with their diploma goes a certificate that says a promise is a promise. And then they go to teaching college and they get a certified credential degree, they can come back and get a job. So kudos, I want that. The other one is, I've been looking at the recruiting numbers and how much we're paying to send people to recruit, and we're not getting any people. And it's a lot of money being thrown with no results. So I know we're trying, but I will say this, now that Governor DeSantis passed or signed the bill this morning, that might help. But I also know that I was able to go on the recruiting trip with St. Lucie County to Michigan, and we recruited in Detroit. And it might behoove you to call and find out whether or not they were able to get a lot of people from that or not, whether or not it was worth the money. Just saying. We need to look at the costs and whether or not we're getting people from that. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And as I'll say, I've said it before, one of our greatest recruiters is everyone sitting in this room, everyone out in the community, you know, presenting and showing us as a great district. So thank you guys for your time.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other additional feedback on any of the goals before we move forward? And Dr. McMahon addressed us with the barriers and with the data format before we transition. Yes. Dr. Warrior?
Yes, sort of a couple of comments, and I think as I look at them, they're both tied together. When the groups came to the table where I was, they were rating whether things were finished, completed, and a number of things. I didn't even give any feedback, so I want to be clear that I'm not necessarily supporting any of that because of two reasons. And we talked about it. If we are creating documents and procedures and those kinds of things, if we could post them on the web, it would be, on the school district website, it would be very helpful. It would also cut down on our need as we look at information to do public records requests. It would talk about transparency, such as we would be creating plans and procedures. Those documents be put on the web somewhere. Also, given the status of those items, and I know there are equity members equity committee members there today, and I didn't see Mrs. Green. I think Mrs. Danbury told me she had an emergency. But one of the things that we had talked about with members of one of our group is it might be a good idea for you to pull the documents that went before the court in December. And that was just as in January, Dr. Moore went down to the courts. And what had happened is we had like 3 different documents, sort of addressing the same issues. And one of the things we're working, I think, very hard at having this year is a unified report. And so if you could use that document, especially the one created by the Equity Committee, and see how those come together, whether your assessment
and their assessment is in links. So we're not in a place where we're submitting 2 or 3 separate documents to the court anymore and requiring Dr. Moore to drive to Miami and back.
So we're going to cover the 2.5 slides. I call it 2.5. The third one really isn't a whole lot of discussion that we didn't get to this morning. The first one is just a review of the barriers that are written out into the plan. So I'll give you a second. I see a lot of you scrambling for your handouts. It is after the iReady data. So if you're kind of fumbling through, you'll get to the Achieve 3000, the discipline data, you'll get to the iReady data, and then you'll get to the alignment between the strategic plan and African American, and it's after that. And so the 1920 plan had 13 barriers, and they are listed up here, 1 through 13. And then there is a proposed 14th barrier to be added to the 2021 plan, and that's up here as number 14. So we wanted to give a chance for you guys to comment on these barriers. Do we believe these are still some of the primary barriers to achievement and the other goal areas that we have established through the plan? Are there things that you want to add? Are there things that we want to change? So I'll give you 2 minutes to review over those, to read through them.
That was from us. That's one of the barriers that we have to recruiting is the cost of living in Indian River County. For example, my oldest son lives in Alabama. He rents a 2-bedroom apartment for $660. You're not going to find a $660 2-bedroom apartment in Indian River County, Florida. So that's when in talking to our new hires and even people that have been here for a year or two, that is one of the prevailing things that they talk about is the cost of living. Right.
So they don't know, because of their work schedules, we're not able to spend as much time
Right,
if
right,
we really like to.
right. So it's just not on the staff side, it's also on the student and parent side.
That's a great point.
Yeah, so maybe we need to, for me, I would say to clarify that a little more. I think it's a very valid barrier because we know that across the community have this height in some of our neighboring counties. But it's not just for the new hires coming in, it's also for parents that are in the system that have children. And we often say that when we the parents need to do more, but they're doing the best they can. If they happen to work 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and keep over their head, then they're not gonna have that extra time to work with their children.
Right.
That, that falls back to us as a school district. It's very valid, it's a very valid point.
A little more detail.
Great feedback. Anything else? Dr. Packard?
Sure. On number 8, just to reflect the work that we're doing integrating the various frameworks that we utilize at Tier 1, I would just suggest, in addition to behavioral supports, adding in social emotional supports as well, since that is so critical to everything that we're doing.
Libby, are you still getting these? Thank you. I figured that.
Being that this is a barrier, how do you perceive correcting it? Number 4.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand your question.
Number
apologize.
4, high impact teachers are not strategically placed at low performance schools. I'm saying, how are you going to correct that?
Oh, I see. I don't know. I think that's where the action plan is, and I don't know if I'm the one that should be speaking to this one or not. But I think that's the idea, is that what these were barriers to student learning. So when we looked at low performing students, we don't necessarily have the highest impact teachers there. So I don't know if I don't want to promise a district something that.
No, I was just saying
Performance data analysts can't.
this is a good place for discussion about it.
I wholeheartedly agree that it is a barrier. One item that we are doing is completely shifting and recreating our evaluation system. The tool that defines someone as an high-impact teacher needs to be completely overhauled and modified. In meeting with our union leadership today, we're very excited to kick off that partnership, spending a year to create an evaluation tool that really continuously informs and grows educators versus one simple evaluation that gives you a rating that is very convoluted in terms of being a high-impact teacher. So that is a long-term solution to create a very complex problem that will continuously grow teachers as we define that system. The more immediate response is master schedule reviews. Next week, 2 weeks from now, July 14th, every single principal in this district will sit with me, cabinet, and senior staff, and we will look at where teachers are assigned and the students that they are assigned to. And we will look at historical outcome data and ask the very difficult question in regards to why teachers have been assigned to certain groups of students in certain courses. And if that answer doesn't satisfy me, that principal will move and ensure we have the right teachers teaching the right students. So a check and balance in terms of master schedule reviews. Mr. Meyer and his team have been working with principals all summer long in the development of master schedule requirements, ensuring students are in the appropriate place, providing that support. But with support comes accountability, and that's the opportunity to sit with me and ensure that what we are doing is in fact putting the high impact teachers in front of students who need to grow the most, while at the same time ensuring that we're continuously investing and growing all of our teachers.
Part of the question and one interpretation of this is placing them at specific schools, right? So the teachers are free to apply to go to jobs at different schools. So the other strategy that you would use to do this is to ensure that the principals are at the right schools. Because what you find from polling teachers of why did you leave a certain school, a lot of times it's not the kids. They're not afraid of the kids. They love the kids. They want to leave the school because they don't want to work for the principal anymore. And they want to go where there's a dynamic principal because that's what they love. So part of the work that Dr. Lohr is doing is to develop principals, improve principals' capacity. So as we improve principals and as we place principals at the right schools, you will find that those high-impact teachers want to come and work at those schools. Now, to Dr. Moore's point, once we get them at the schools, we still have the obligation to ensure the principal puts them in the right classes. But we don't really have most districts don't. I don't know, I'm not as well versed on our, I don't know that we can just push teachers around to the schools, right? I think they have to go willingly. I don't think we can just say, Dr. Long, you're great, you're going to this school today, right? I mean, she's free to choose to go to the school. In certain instances where you have, reduction in student populations, we find spots for people, but as far as forced transfers because of things like that, it's a little bit different. So that's my take on that. That's how we want to encourage them to get to the low-performing schools. Were you going to say the principal thing too? No.
Any other comments?
Yes.
Go ahead.
My comment is one that I continue to make, that the barriers are identified for the most part they're not data-based or data-driven identified barriers. And until they're barriers that we believe are connected, or it's our hypothesizing, it's our bias. Until we have a way of looking at what the real barriers are, we will continue to address things that may not make an impact. Let me ask, we have had these barriers we actually had them, I guess, in the 2018-19 African American Plan. Nowhere has it ever been reported that any changes in these barriers impacted anything that we're looking at, say student achievement, for example. So we just put the barriers out there and we do them, but we've not had any feedback yet on how changing them or addressing any of them related to outcomes.
I couldn't agree more. I don't think the district was designed in a way to acknowledge its shortcomings and to strategically hold itself accountable to put plans of action in place in order to bring about an outcome. So as we have defined barriers and we were not strategic in identifying the action steps that we needed to take or have the bold, difficult conversations that we needed to have in order to bring about change. So the lack of movement historically, I completely understand as to why it hasn't moved. In this structure, as well as the systems, the design of the district strategic plan, the overlap, the intentionality around the design to implement this strategic plan, this African American Achievement Plan, the level of accountability, the level of support, the organizational design, I guarantee you will see improvement in these numbers immediately as we move forward, and then shifts in practice as we continue to grow and learn from implementation.
But will they be connected, Dr. Moore, with these particular barriers or with something else that's going on? I'm almost saying, do these barriers need to be set aside, and are there some other barriers from the model that you're proposing to cause the changes? Because if we don't accurately identify those barriers, and there's actually this other plan and model that you have moving in the district, it doesn't fit. And so I'm not saying that I doubt that I think, yeah, a lot of things look potentially better, But if we're going to identify those barriers, maybe they shouldn't be in the plan right now.
I think that me personally, the theory of action in terms of strategic design focuses in on identifying where your barriers are and then creating strategies that have the highest influence on eliminating or reducing that defined barrier. I struggle with continuously trying to connect every barrier to an individual data set because one strategy has a number of different influences overall on different data points. So looking to address the barriers requires problem solving in the development of an action plan that has multiple influences on the improvement of multiple data points. So the theory of action is really to define, hey, where are our barriers? Where are we systematically failing? And those barriers are validated by data. We know the reality in which we currently sit as a system. It is all I have been talking about for the last 5 months in the creation of our organizational design has been in response to that reality in order to ensure that we're moving forward. So I understand what you're saying. I think the barriers need to be there because the action plans that we have created should support the elimination of those barriers or the significant reduction of those particular barriers.
Any follow-up, Dr. Warrior?
Yeah, so if none of these barriers need to be connected to a specific data set, I can understand that. But how, I mean, so what do we say? The grades go up or we move in, I mean, where do we get to measure that we've identified the appropriate barriers? Or the root cause analysis that you're saying, this is what stands in the way of this and this. Those barriers were created before your plan, Dr. Moore, you know the direction in which you're taking them. So how do we know that those specific barriers link to anything? And it's not that they have to link to any set, but indeed, we need to identify the obstacles, the challenges, the barriers, so we can address them. And so I always get thrown off, and I guess I'll just stop looking at this part of the plan because I always get thrown off and looking at those that were created here and then no feedback on, you know, so what if how would we know, say, this year, given that we've had a year and a half with the same barriers, that these barriers moved anything? And you're saying we wouldn't just because we were never designed, I think, as a district to measure outcomes based on barriers?
Dr. Warrior, I think I might be able to address, because I hear what you're saying as far as the barriers, and I can share just a little bit from the student services side that we did go through to identify our barriers, a problem-solving process in which we looked at, and I'll just, for example, a need for increased consistency in the quality and implementation of Tier 1 behavioral supports. What we were looking at are the inconsistencies in the ODRs, OSS, ISS across the district, and so we did verify barriers that we identify with data. Now, with regard to your second portion of your question, I very much hear what you're saying. At what point do we know that we've identified the correct barriers? If you look at these barriers, so the need for increased skills and cultural competency, if when we implement the PD, and then now that we are actually, I think, improving our measurement of it, we're looking, are we actually seeing these practices applied in the classrooms? If we see them applied and we also see academic success go up, then we know we've correctly identified that barrier. I think the challenge that we're running into right now is we had a plan that was approved, and then shortly thereafter, we went out because of COVID. And so it's really hard for us to gauge at this point whether the barriers that we had identified and linked to specific strategies really had any impact. And I'm hopeful that in the next year, we'll be able to make those assertions a little bit more clearly.
Any other comments, questions, conversation?
Hi, it's Terry Bearborg again. I heard mention of housing issues. I don't have the documents in front of me that you guys created today or amended, but I do know that the item that I brought up to discuss and form a committee for, Dr. Moore had initially put on there in the plan. Dr. Moore, can you speak to whether or not that's still in the plan, or is this going forward? Because I want to be able to get that going in July.
Yes, that is still in the plan. Goal 4.
Great, because I'm hoping that we can help solve that housing problem.
All right, the next part of the African American Achievement Plan we wanted to get some feedback is the definition section. This is not obviously a complete listing of the definitions. Chris, am I right in that we're just looking for some input on any of the definitions, or?
So last year in January and February, we got a lot of feedback on trying to make items more clear, or some of these areas more clear. That way the public could understand them. So what we're looking for here is there any areas that we can kind of clean up the language to make it more available to understand from the community.
So in the PowerPoint, if you're looking at the PowerPoint slide, you're only going to see these 5. So if you actually go into the plan itself, it's on page 5 of the proposed plan. And that has the complete listing of definitions. And I will say, kind of to maybe spur on the conversation as you guys are finding it and looking through them, in light of Dr. Long's comment earlier about the progress report and the notes, the idea already is when we do have these progress reports, the data out there, to bring the relevant language into those reports as well. So it's not just, so you don't have these definitions in a whole different document, you have them where it is actually handy to have them. Any other suggestions, edits, as you guys are looking through them? Dr. Warrior, Ms. Wall, Ms. Berenborg, I'll give you an opportunity to speak up if you so desire.
Hi, this is Terry Berenborg. I need to leave because I need to go to another meeting, but I appreciate being able to participate, and I look forward to seeing the documents. Thank you so much for your hard work, everyone.
Thank you. All right, so one last thing. Oh, actually 2 last things. One is real quick. Just to kind of FYI.
Terry Berenborg
is now exiting.
Love Teams. The current reporting format does have this table of different progress measures as well as frequency. It's redundant. It is in other places, so the proposal is to remove it from this, the proposed plan, just this section. It's not removing the frequency of the data monitoring. It's not removing any of the progress measures. It's just removing that table from that particular section. Just want to let you know that. And then finally, in light of this morning's conversation about having the data to where we have kind of 3 levels of data, I created this a couple months ago as an idea. I have not edited it since this morning, so this would not be the final, but this is kind of in light of your suggestions of providing some high level one-pager. Here's a monthly, just where we stand. Let me see if I can increase the... So across here, it has some explanation as to what the office discipline referrals are. Quick little chart that shows it disaggregated by race, ethnicity. You've got OSS, ISS, and then the length of the suspension events, where the distribution is across the race, ethnicities, and then the average length of days. So the idea, and I want to kind of get some feedback, just that high level, where are we in discipline? Where are we in academics? Where are we in ESE identification? Just this, boom, this is the major piece that we're looking at. And then, obviously, that secondary, wow, our OSS is huge. I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Well, this kind of triggers that or prompts that. And then we have that second level, which is what we presented in the PowerPoint here. And so this would provide that beginning of understanding what is the trend leading up to this, what are the progress measures right now, and then obviously remember there's going to be multiple tabs to this to show you the data by school, by grade, and so forth. And then if there's even more problem solving, we're going to have that third level, which might just be an in-person, let's tear the data apart, looking at our systems in Unify, Power BI, let's talk about this and let's see where the additional problems might lie. So kind of get some feedback from you guys specific to that. Is that in line with what you guys were thinking? Obviously, don't read exactly word for word because we can edit that, but the idea behind it. One pager, monthly update.
So this would be the global look, the overarching piece of looking at discipline for the district in total. And then the other sheet would break it down by school, by teacher, by ethnicity. Is that
maybe not by teacher,
not
just depending
teacher,
on what
but
it is,
by
but
school?
yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
Okay. I know by subgroup.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he said that one. Okay.
Any other thoughts? That's all I had. I don't know if Dr. Warrior, Ms. Wall.
Well, I certainly, I don't, I agree with the overall concept because we're trying to present an awful lot of information in a single document for a number of different purposes. So I think some sort of tiered approach or hierarchy of reports makes a lot of sense.
The data we currently have that's now attached to the African American Achievement Plan, we still would have that, but only as an attachment on the website. So people who want to go in and look and see, because it's a little overwhelming to have that as a part of the African, that's what we heard, that's the feedback that we heard. So those people who want to see that can go. We'll have the appendix 2020-21. It will be there available for you to access.
That would be the goal. Now, obviously, until we actually put it out there, I'm not a web designer, but the idea would be kind of, in my envision, our web designer might be like, oh, that's not happening. But the idea would be we have these files, we need to organize them a little bit better so they're easier to see. But yeah, here's a page of goal 1, the academics. Here are the overall math, ELA, science, social studies, and then maybe another page for some of the other measures that are in there. But yes, the idea, we want to structure it to where it's easy to understand. You're not looking at one document that has 80,000 data measures in it. You're looking at specifically what data you want to address. So if I'm only looking at ELA, I'm going to go to the ELA section, if you will, the file, whatever the format looks like. You're going to click on that. It will pull up the spreadsheet that has all that data with the different tabs and stuff on.
Right, and I would like to say that please do it on spreadsheets for data kinds of things and not PDFs.
Yes.
Brian, will we have an opportunity to kind of give some input about what data we'd like to see? For example, the Equity Committee often asks what specifically are Black students suspended for, but then when you get down into it, it may be disrespect, but what does that look like? And so is there going to be any anecdotal information?
Yeah, absolutely. We can actually give you a little bit more specific time. We have it in the current African American Progress Report. We actually have the discipline by location, and the location would be like hallway, classroom. And then what you're asking for is exactly that. What was the precipitating behavior? So absolutely, we can include that as well. Yep. And some of that stuff, it's that iterative process. It's almost like you look at one data set and you're like, huh, I wonder why. And then, well, can we have it this way? Absolutely. But it wasn't until that you looked at the first data set that prompted that idea. So I think that's a great idea, and I think that moving forward, absolutely, as we kind of tweak the overall format, we can add those elements to it.
I like that. I know, Brian, that DJJ does it because I follow their data on their website, and I can go in and look at arrests and what those were arrests for, which again, you say very minor things like disrespect. I mean, some very minor misdemeanors. So that would be helpful to look at that.
Hopefully, we won't have much arrest data for you to look at.
Well, no, I didn't mean.
I understand your point.
Whatever is getting, kids in suspension, yes, or stuff. We could always track. It was interesting what kinds of things got them in trouble and what schools sometimes it was because different things are acceptable in different schools.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other comments, questions?
The other feedback for the format, we want to get this right. We want to make sure that we get feedback on it so we can get it right. Dr. Warrior, you keep hearing me say that because we want to get it right.
Well, let me throw this out again, and I'll be quiet so Ms. Wall, if she has anything. Now, when you say format, because I still, as I look at the tables, I don't like the way the data is aggregated when we're looking at a grade, a single score for grades 3 through 10. Have we decided that we're going to disaggregate that by at least by grade level and hopefully by school?
Yes, Dr. Warrior. So kind of that's where we're talking about the 3 tiers of data. So the first tier is maybe where are we 3 to 10? Where are we overall? Where's the achievement gap overall? And that way it'll give us a good idea of a pulse of where we are as a district. But that, to your point, that's not enough. Do we have pockets in certain grade levels? Do we have pockets at certain areas of the county or at different schools? And so that second tier is that progress, that data sheet was in the PowerPoint that shows the baseline at the top, the state, the district. Underneath it was the progress measure. And then what you didn't see is the second and third and fourth tab to that spreadsheet. That's where we'll put out the data by school and ethnicity, by grade level by ethnicity, and it will be standardized. So every data measure that we have that we are able to disaggregate that way will have those same secondary tabs. So you'll see whether it's gifted identification or the suspension data or the hiring. We're going to try to get it to where you can see it by school by ethnicity, by grade level by ethnicity. And so you have that kind of available to you. And then obviously, I think there's going to be that third tier that I hope you take us up on the offer of just sitting down and maybe kind of doing some live problem solving, because a lot of that detail can't be captured in a static spreadsheet. I could if you gave me a specific directive, but the problem is there's 1,000 ways to slice it. We want to make sure that we're slicing it in a way that leads to action. And a lot of that requires a dynamic look. It's me at this site looking at this problem, hypothesizing, and then trying to find the data to validate or refute that hypothesis. And a lot of times that's not possible by producing a spreadsheet. It is through some of our automated data management systems, the Unify, the Performance Matters, through that Power BI, that present data kind of live, where I can just click a button and see this is the way it is disaggregated by race, ethnicity. This is, tearing it apart that way. And so that level of problem solving might take some meetings in person or via Teams to do.
I appreciate your offer to meet on it, because as you well know, it's an area that for years I've looked at. So I would like us to be able to come, yeah. Well, certainly Ms. Wall, because we've done so many data things now. Reports.
Yeah, initially, I think until the COVID thing subsides, we'll do it through Teams, but eventually it's probably a little more conducive in person, but we can still manage it virtually as well.
Absolutely, because Dr. Moore owes me a coffee in a row.
Are there any more questions regarding the data, the goals, the first section of the African American Achievement Plan? Anything else before we get into the reflection part of the meeting? Anything else? Of course, again, we're going to ask you, if you had feedback, we're going to ask you to leave this on your table. But if you look on the back of your sheet, we just want to go through some reflections with you and really thank you for participating today. We know it was a long day, but we really wanted to collaborate, discuss, get feedback, so we can make the plan something that we can be proud of as a district. So the reflection part says, think about what you learned today. Number one, what new knowledge did you learn? And number two, write your thoughts below. I used to think blank, now I think blank, so now I will blank. So think about how we came in this morning. We had a few technical difficulties this morning. And how you came in and what you thought it was going to be about, and how, what you're going to leave here with. Maybe a new mindset, or a better commitment, or giving more feedback, or collaborating more. So just think about that reflection part, because we really do want your feedback. And the two people, Ms. Wall and Dr. Warrior, we want your feedback as well, so you can send me, if you don't mind, email me your reflection, or you can choose not to, but we really want feedback. That's how we get better at our craft. And we're going to ask that all of the district teams who are in charge of, as the goal facilitators, to please, all the updates and the information that you received today regarding feedback, additions, deletions, edits, that you complete those in your section of the African American Achievement Plan by Friday. Because our commitment is on Monday, we're going to send this plan back out to the Equity Committee members and to the NAACP to get feedback, because we want feedback to make sure that we captured all of our work today. And then also, if you can think of, our Equity Committee members, as you go home, you may say, hey, and that has happened numerous times, when you think about it and you look at it again, you say, hey, I want to tweak this. So we're going to call, and I'll call you guys again and get that feedback, so we can really have our plan solidified, hopefully, by next week. Because it has to go to the board July 21st, and we have to post it and all of that. So we really want to make sure that we have a solid plan going to the board, and we talk about the process. We really want it to be collaborative. Are there any questions? I want to say thank you for participating. This was a long day, but I hope you really got something out of it so we can impact our students and, you know, chart the course for excellence next year for our students. Thank you.
I'm going to get us out of here. I'm going to get us out of here. Just thank Ms. Dampier and her team for putting this work together and lead. As she reminds me, team of one. Thank you for staying in there, hanging in there. This is such important work. As we take this step, it isn't the last step. Today was a day of planning and organizing. As Ms. Dampier just said, we follow up and we coordinate based on the information and how we have learned today to really put a plan together that moves the needles. And we move from a time of just talking about things to being bold and courageous to changing the reality. And that takes all of us coming together, uniting together, and walking shoulder to shoulder in order to make that happen. And we will continue to problem solve, continue to listen, and continue to learn to make that happen. So thank you for your continued effort and support in this work. And we're looking forward really to making this happen. So thank you for a very, very, very long day after what was a very, very long day yesterday. But hey, for our students, we'll have a very, very long day tomorrow. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your week.